Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. And today in this holiday season, we are talking about going forward to do good out in the world. And my first guest tonight is John Horsch, and he is from SALT, Social Action Linking Together. And he has been doing the work, the good work of Northern Virginia since 1983. Thank you so much for being here, John.
I'm delighted to be here, and thank you so much for the invitation, for the opportunity to talk about what we do.
Well, I got your email, and everyone should subscribe, in my opinion, to your email, because you had a wonderful fall conference in November, and you had a wonderful speaker. Sister Simone was one of your speakers, but I was so impressed with the lengthy list of the many, many things that you're working on. And so I kind of wanted to share with our viewers today as we think about how we can all go forward and do good in the coming year. Tell us a little bit about how you came to form SALT. What was the genesis of this?
Well, we have quite a story, and I think we kind of stumbled into it. I was invited to do a workshop at a Catholic Charities conference. They called it a convocation, which is a fancy word for a conference, and I spoke about homelessness, and so I guess the evals were okay because they invited me back the next year, and I spoke about hunger, and one of the people in the audience got really agitated, and I thought maybe I said something wrong or he was angry. The anger was self-directed at himself. He said, Mr. Horsch, I came and learned so much about homelessness last year, and I felt so bad about it. And he said, but yet here I am back again this year, and I haven't done a darn thing about it. And so he says, it's not enough to learn about the problem and study it or to become aware. He says, it's what you do when you leave here the next day, Monday, during the week. I say, anybody that agrees with this gentleman, sign this piece of paper. And one of the things we learned in preparing and offering the workshop was that Virginia was creaming the food stamp program by charging sales tax. They were taking $9.5 million off the top of the food stamp program. This was food that was intended for at-risk families. And it's like scraping food off this
right off the plate
of hungry children. And so we decided that we were going to, 8 people signed up. So the 8 of us, we became the gang of 8. And we went to Richmond, and people in the workshop said, oh, you can't do that. You'll just turn off the legislators. And some said, well, you have to wait till the bishop invites you to go. And we said, no, we're going. And so when we got to Richmond, we were warmly welcomed. They practically hugged us and said, it's about time some Catholics showed up here. All the other faiths have been here, they're very visible. And so anyway, we educated vigorously on the issue of food stamps being the sales tax on food stamps. And the response we got, oh, that's awful, that's immoral, that's wrong. So when the session was over, we said to our legislators that agreed with us, what did you do? And they said, oh, nothing. So we went up there the next year thinking it would happen again, and nothing. So after the 3rd year, we were, it was like banging our head against the wall. So I called Senator Kennedy's office one day, and I said, I know Senator Kennedy lives in McLean, and he should be concerned. This is his adopted state, and this is what Virginia's doing to the food stamp program. And they said, oh my God, he'll put in a bill to stop them. And the phone rang about two hours later, and the staff called and they said, Mr. Horsch, I hope you're sitting down. We did some checking, and there's 18 other states, almost all southern states, that are doing this. And they said, we got a better idea. So I thought, oh, he's not going to put in a bill. They said, he'll put in a bill, but he said, the food stamp program is being reauthorized. It happens every 5 years, and it's in the markup stage, which means the very last, where they go over it line by line to make sure there isn't anything in there that's going to get it in trouble when it gets to the floor. So they gave me the number to call. The guy that answered was so upset. He said, we had no idea this was going on. He almost dropped the phone. In fact, he let out some expletives. And he says, consider it stopped. I'll put a prohibition in the markup. He stopped all 19 states.
That is amazing.
So if we increase food aid in each of those states by $10 million or $9 million like Virginia, we increase food aid by $190 million. When word spread out to the parishes, we had 180 members within a few weeks. And it was success breeds success. I mean, it's so energizing, and so many people were attracted to that success that, you know, the way we stumbled into it was just incredible. And we could have given up at any point. So persistence is just, you know, it's so necessary and it's so important. And so I said to one of the Gang of Eight, I said, well, how can we make the legislators realize that we're for real, and that we had to, she said, well, let's have a spring conference right after this General Assembly
session's
over, and invite them to come and tell us what they did. And they had to stand in front of us and tell us they didn't do anything about food stamps. And here we were celebrating. And so Senator Gartland was so embarrassed, and he came running to the mic and he said, I can work with you on homelessness. I got some good ideas. You come and see me. I said, we'll see you in September. No, he says, you come in May. And so that was the birth of the Homeless Intervention Program, to keep people in their own homes who are being evicted.
Right.
The Homeless Intervention Program gave them short-term aid, you know, either paid the back rent or helped them with their security deposits or their moving expenses. And we got that through with Senator Gartland's leadership, and he paid attention to his P's and Q's. So.
And I think that this is a great way to stumble into something by focusing on one thing.
Yes.
You had a win.
Yes.
But you gave your organization a title,
yes.
so people know who SALT is.
Yes.
You know, when you all show up, or when somebody knows that you're coming to Richmond.
We have a brand.
You have a brand, and you have a brand that has had a lot of success, even though we were talking before about some things take a long time, like the Earned Income Tax Credit, which you were very instrumental in getting here in Virginia. It took a very long time.
Almost 10 years, yes.
Yeah, but you kept at it, and we have it.
And we had provision in it to make it refundable, which would have been more helpful to the people who are working to, you know, help them to stay employed and make work pay. But the minority party didn't want to have anything to do with the refundable part. So we were trying to convince them, and they said, look, you either take a non-refundable or nothing. So we were glad to take, that was a hard lesson for us, but we learned to take a half a loaf.
Right.
And so we did get a Virginia earned income tax credit, but it wasn't refundable. It wasn't everything we wanted, but
But that's incrementalism.
Yes.
So you know, and you're right. Sometimes it is a hard lesson to learn.
I think Virginia is known for incrementalism. So, and we've learned to live with it.
We're very conservative.
Yes.
Fiscally.
Yes.
You know,
even though we're the 7th wealthiest state.
I know. I was talking to George Barker last week, a couple of weeks ago.
Good senator.
He is, and I said, I think the word I saw printed somewhere was stingy, in relationship to Virginia's benefits relative to other states.
Yes.
Very stingy.
Yeah.
But you know, you have also, you know, put together, this is a faith-based coalition. It started out as a faith-based coalition, but it's really expanded tremendously now.
Absolutely. Senator Gartland used to always say to me, John, don't let this just be a Catholic thing.
Right.
And so I had, when we started working on the HIP program, the Homeless Intervention Program, I had a African-American Baptist church from Merrifield call and say they wanted to work with us, and another African-American church from McLean, and they were among our best advocates. They were wonderful. I just enjoyed working with them. But then we built, at this point I would say, we're non-denominational to the point where I think 60% are other than Catholic.
Right.
We have Unitarians and Jewish and Muslim and Protestants, and we don't pay attention to who's what. We're all in this together.
And it's such a great sense of community, right? Like
yes,
those are the people in your community.
Yes.
All of those people are in our
Absolutely.
community.
And we look like the community, so we, you know, we're.
So your social justice work, and you know, and there's issue there. So people perceive social justice in many different ways.
Yes.
The word I have heard lately used more often is equity. You know, when we talk about social equity or economic equity or, you know, diversity, you know, equity being that we need to make it more fair for people to access.
Absolutely. And our bias is toward the people who are at the bottom, and those happen to be the TANF recipients, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. The benefits in that program, that's a program for children.
Right.
People don't realize that, but it's for children. And they're down there with Alabama and Mississippi and Louisiana, so we've been working very hard to increase the benefits because the children are our future, and this is what we're doing to them. We're making them so desperately poor. And so we did something very clever and very successful this last session. Virginia, I don't understand how they got away with it, but they have a 3-tier benefit program. The urban areas get one level, and Richmond gets another, and then the rural states are way down there. It's just very desperately poor. I went to a Republican senator from Southwest Virginia, and I told him about this. I said, you should be concerned because you have so much unemployment and so much poverty in your area. And I said, well, he said, what you gonna do about it? And I said, let's just absorb the bottom level into the middle level. Let's consolidate them. He said, go out there and write a budget amendment. And he had a new aide who didn't know what a budget amendment was, so I dictated one for him. And you know, by God, he got it through, he got it passed. So that bottom level had been lifted for those families. That's enormous. That's just, you know, so anyway,
well, it's very inspirational though to hear that you have good ideas and simply placing the right idea with the right person,
yes.
It gets things done. And so, and when we get back from our break, I'm going to talk to you more about that. So please join us after this break. We are talking to John Horsch from SALT, Social Action Linking Together. And this is information that you'll want to know before we head into our 2018 legislative session down in Richmond. So please stay tuned and we'll be right back.
You know what, guys? There's a lot of tree branches and dry brush over here. We should probably move the bonfire over there.
I'm guessing Smokey liked that idea.
Did you know kids who play outdoors have healthier lungs?
Totally.
I did. Did you know that boys that play with dolls make better husbands?
My son has lots of dolls.
But did you know terry cloth diapers breathe better?
I did.
It's totally true.
Oh, yeah.
Did you know that strollers have the right of way on the sidewalk?
Yes.
Yep, I did. Did you guys
Did you know that kids who eat breakfast have higher GPAs?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. That's actually what I was going to say.
Did you know babies should never touch silver? It's really bad for them.
I knew that.
Did you guys know that statistically friendly kids have more friends?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's obvious.
Did you know most people think they're using the right car seat for their kid, but they're not?
Parents who really know it all know for sure that their child is in the right seat at the right age and size. Visit safercar.gov/the right seat to make sure your child is protected.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. This is Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. Joining me this evening is John Horsch. We are talking about SALT, which is Social Action Linking Together. Thank you so much for being here,
Thank
John.
you.
And
Delighted.
so we were talking about the pin that you're wearing on your lapel, which is the SALT logo. And it's an interesting juxtaposition of the letters with a staff of wheat, it looks like. How in the world did you come up with that?
Well, I'm kind of puzzled myself, but and I frequently, when people ask me that question, I stumble around, have a little trouble explaining it. But one of the great things about our advocacy is you meet tremendous people who are very good at advocacy. It just comes to them naturally, and they really have compassion and this kind of thing. So one in particular, Betsy dropped me a note, and she says, I've noticed the stem of wheat in your logo, and she says, I never focused on the SALT logo before, but now I think I get it. She says that each of us brings our particular handiwork to be a grain of wheat in the harvest of justice. She says, I offer this in thanks to SALT for calling on each of us to be witnesses to that harvest in the making. And I think that's so perfect.
I do too.
And I was invited to speak to a group, and I didn't know it was going to be families, and there was a bunch of kids, so I tried to get it down to the level they would understand. A little guy, he must have been about 7 years old, he said, I get it, I get it. And he says, when I behave myself and I do the right thing, then there won't be missing kernels from the
there you go.
wheat. And I said, well, I'm going to take you on the road with me. So
I think it's great because you're so right, because we were talking before the break how a good idea, appropriately placed, adequately cultivated, and shepherded along, ends up delivering the thing that you want.
Exactly.
And a lot of people don't stay in the game long enough to realize after 10 years that you actually got the thing you were working for. Is that frustrating for a lot of the newer people who come in?
Yes, it is, and that's why we have a fall conference, is to offer training and to give them focus and to help them. We bring in some big name speakers like we did this year. Simone.
Oh yes, Sister Simone from Nuns on the Bus. I love her.
And the year before we had Mark Shriver, and his book is about his father. And it's very inspiring. Sometimes you see tears in the audience, and it's very motivating. And the thing that we learned after we got the homeless intervention program, and we got kind of ahead of ourselves in terms of thinking how successful we are, we opened our agenda up to a whole smorgasbord of issues, and we found very quickly that doesn't work, that you got to be very focused. And I remember Senator Gartland saying to me, all those things, if you don't know what you want, how am I supposed to know?
Right.
And he said, I can only do one or two of those things. So after that, we went back to be reality and focused on one issue at a time, one or two, and then we started having success again. So, but keeping the troops out there motivated and from being discouraged is important, because the legislators listen to them, because they're the people on the front lines. They're the constituents.
They're the constituents, and they have the real experience.
I can talk to them in committee and stuff, but when they hear from their constituents, it makes a difference. And one of the early days, we were testifying, and I got a call after I testified. It was about the TANF recipients, welfare recipients. And it was my delegate from Vienna, and she was the chairman of the Appropriations Committee. And she says, John, I had no idea that benefits could be so tragically low. How can the children and families survive on that? And I says, well, you know, we've been pushing for this. And she says, well, she said, the reason I'm calling you, I just learned that there's a surplus and that the governor's putting it on the table, and he's going to need my approval, and I want to use it for these families. And she said, don't tell anybody I told you, but start calling the governor, having your people, and calling the people on the committee, and by God, she got it.
See?
So anyway, until you speak up, and until you realize you have a voice, and what good is a voice unless you use it? That's what message we try to get out in our fall training. And then in the spring we have a wrap-up well, in the fall, we also introduced what issues we're going to be working on. And for example, this coming year, we found out that prisons are starting to offer video visitations, but in so doing, they're cutting back on family
visitation. I read about that.
And it's so important that the prisoners have
contact with their family.
Contact and relationship with their family, because that reduces recidivism. They have a support system when they get out. Otherwise, they go back to their old buddies and their old ways. Yeah. So anyway, we're putting in legislation. We already have a bill drafted to prohibit them from denying family visits.
Or cutting it back. In other words, add video, but don't cut back any of the schedule for family visitation.
Yes. For the good of the family, for the good of the community, because today's prisoner is tomorrow's neighbor.
That's right.
90% of them are going to get out and they're coming back to the community. And if they have a relationship and they succeed, that's going to make a big difference as taxpayers as well.
Absolutely. So what are some of the other things on your top list of priorities for the 2018?
Well, we've learned that there's school lunch shaming going on, and we've been just hearing so much about it. And one legislator that I talked to was a little on the fence. And he called me and he said, he checked with his local school, and it's going on at his school. He said the kids are going home with that can't pay with big orange stickers.
Right.
And all the other kids know why it's orange, and theirs is a different color if they have one. And it's it's embarrassing the kids, and it's stigmatizing the families, and they should be dealing with the parents. It's not the
children's fault. The lunch account is in arrears.
And the families are not necessarily deadbeat. Recently, I saw an article in the Washington Post editorial that says 40% of Americans' families, if they had a $400 car repair bill or something, don't have $400 in their checking account. So these families may not have paid the lunch money because
they have to pay something else.
They have to pay either a medical bill or a car repair, and if they don't repair the car, they're going to lose their jobs. And so there has to be a better way to deal with it. But this legislator found out about this in his own school. He put in the bill immediately.
Yeah,
so.
And I agree with that. And that happens in schools everywhere.
Yeah.
So that sounds like a wonderful focus.
Yeah.
And what other kinds of things? I know you said...
Well, I have another biggie that last year had such momentum, and we got it all the way through the Senate Rehabilitation and Social Services Committee. We got it through Finance. It came over to the House. It went through 2 committees in the House, and it went to Appropriations. It was at the top of the docket when they got word that it was the last meeting of the session, and that no bills that have any cost to them would be heard. So it was dropped at the last. So we had it all that way. So we're coming back, and that's called our scholarship pilot project. And it takes welfare funds and it uses them as an incentive to kids to do well in school. And if they do, they might be able to compete for a small scholarship, so that they have the hope that they too can go to college like the other kids in the school, and that they can break that generational cycle of poverty in their families, be the first ones. And it doesn't necessarily have to be limited to college. It can be
technical training. There's doing so much now with the community college certification program.
And there's terrific support for us. I think this year we're going to get it. And one thing I wanted to share with you is something you said, is that we almost always work across the aisle. On this, we have a Republican senator patroning it from Southwest, where he is excited that the community college there would be able to do this with some of the kids that are desperately poor that otherwise have no future. Yeah. So, so those are 3.
Well, you are so wise too in understanding. You've been doing this since 1983.
Yeah.
I know that one of your big supporters and your biggest ally is Ken Plum, Delegate
Yes,
Ken Plum.
absolutely.
And he's been down in Richmond about as long as you've been doing this work.
Yes.
And the pendulum swings back and forth. Sometimes the Republicans are in charge, and sometimes the Democrats are in charge. And you have to build the relationships. And I think you've touched on that a little bit. That you have to have the right idea. You have to be able to call somebody who thinks you're credible.
Yeah.
You have to make, so many times people are like, but why would my phone call make a difference? Why would my email? Because you're a constituent. And because you know how to talk about the issue. And because you can bring a story or a personal experience or that kind of passion.
That means everything. And legislators, I've heard this comment so many times, say to us, we respect you and we want to work with you because you're here speaking for others. You're not just here for yourself. And that means a lot to legislators. And the other thing I was going to say about is, if you have a matchstick and you press down, you can break it. That's one voice. But if you have 3 or 4 matchsticks and put down, you're not going to break it.
That's a great
unless
analogy.
you're very powerful. So anyway, that's the value of making a difference by using your voices and joining your voice with others. That's
and so
critical.
People can find out. You do have a website, and we'll give people the website address so that they can go on and they can, in fact, subscribe to get your notices of the conferences in the spring and in the fall and what you're working on. And
yes, we do fact sheets on our issues. We say which committee it's being assigned to, who's on the committee, when it's coming up in committee, so that it's and we give a proposed message to send to the committee members, which they can personalize.
Right.
Yeah, and we urge them to personalize it. But we tell them that they have to act by Thursday because if you send it in on Friday and they defeated it on Thursday, it isn't going to do any good. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, organization is the key, and it sounds like you've gotten that kind of.
Yeah. I went to St. Mark's, and this lady comes running up to me, John, I sent in my message. And I said, when? And I said, just yesterday. And I said, well, it was killed last week.
Yeah, you gotta.
Timing is everything.
Timing's everything, and so people need to stay tuned and they need to stay on top of it.
And we do that.
And you do that. And the other thing is, I think it's easier to do this kind of advocacy work when you're in the company of other people who care about it as passionately as you do.
Support each other. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I just want to tell you that we started out with 8, and we're now well over 1,300.
Wow.
And a lot of them are husbands and wives, and I only count them for 1.
Wow, 1,300 households, perhaps we could call it that. 13. Thank you so much, John. I really appreciate you coming and kind of sharing this good message. Again, here at the holidays, this is so important.
Go and do good.
Go and do good. We can all do good. Please join us after the break. I've got 2 guests, and we're going to be talking about prison reform and solitary confinement. So please come back after the break.
For all the papas out there, let's stop what we're doing and take a moment to be with our kids. They can be loud moments, goofy moments, dorky moments. It doesn't really matter. Every time dads take a moment to be with their kids, it's pretty momentous. So let's all take a moment to make a moment today.
Hey, did you know that 2.4 million loving cats and dogs in shelters and rescues need our help to find a home? Go to theshelterpetproject.org and search your local shelters and rescues. Go for a cuddle with your next best friend. Adopt.
Okay, so we drowned the fire, stirred it, drowned it again, and now just feel if it's cold.
Yeah.
Cool.
Smokey just gave me a bear hug.
I know. I already posted it.
We cannot be bystanders.
We can stop to make sure someone is okay.
We can warn someone when their drink isn't safe.
And disrupt the situation.
We can.
Get someone the cab.
Or walk them home safely.
We can make campuses safer for our friends.
Our roommates.
Our classmates. Our fellow human beings.
We cannot be bystanders.
We can.
Intervene.
It's on us. All of us.
Learn how and take the pledge at itsonus.org.
When it comes to saving money,
What?
don't act like a baby.
Oh, it's like they're having their own little meeting.
This is so humiliating. Be the boss. I'm the boss.
What the?
Power nap. You were saying. And make a budget.
Let's get to work.
Need a little help?
Stacy, read back the notes.
I can't read. What's it say?
Create a personalized savings plan and get other tools and tips.
We can share.
You obviously didn't go to business school. At feedthepig.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and talking again about how we can go forward and do good in this world. I've got two guests joining me today from the Interfaith Action for Human Rights. I have Kimberly Jenkins Snodgrass and Gay Gardner. Thank you, ladies, so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
So explain a little bit about what this particular interfaith group does. You are focused on doing something about the terrible situation we have with prisons in this country, but specifically solitary confinement, which is in many countries and in a lot of treaties has been identified as torture, but apparently not here.
Yes, well, Interfaith Action for Human Rights was founded by people who were involved in the National Religious Campaign Against Torture and who lived in Maryland, Virginia, and D.C. The National Religious Campaign Against Torture was started in 2006 to oppose the Bush administration's torture of suspected terrorists in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks. And they realized that one of the techniques that had been used on those detainees to break them psychologically was isolation, prolonged isolation. And so the National Religious Campaign felt that it should also work on ending prolonged isolation in U.S. prisons. So they hired a full-time staff member to coordinate that work. And then when IAHR formed as a regional partner of the National Religious Campaign, we focused largely on solitary confinement because there was a growing consensus really among human rights advocates and mental health professionals that long-term isolation in prisons is torture.
And it also doesn't help to rehabilitate anybody. And I think we have a fundamental question about what people are actually in prison for. To pay their debt to society and then to come back and be reintegrated into society. But if we are actually psychologically torturing them, it would seem that we are being so punitive as to cripple them from actually being able to reenter our society.
Right, and Catherine, in the case of Virginia, you have a system where sometimes these inmates will get sentences that's longer or more severe than what's been assigned to them in the court of law on their criminal case. And that's why solitary confinement is so important to IAHR efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and here's the other thing. Most cases don't actually ever get a jury trial. I think that's the other thing people don't understand about how the justice system, justice loosely worded, system works. You take a plea bargain, and if you have the audacity to actually push your case, and you lose, your sentence will be even longer. That's how they discourage you from actually pursuing a trial.
Exactly.
I mean, so this is, the whole thing is so broken, and I know the statistics are mind-blowing, that, you know, we've got 2 million people in prison in the United States. You know, 30% of women in prison, 30% are just in the United States.
Right, right.
You know, and one of the statistics, because I work with Friends of Guest House, which is a reentry program for women who are formerly incarcerated, is 90% of women behind bars have been physically or sexually abused.
And the state of Virginia ranks 13 for solitary confinement and incarceration.
And that is crazy. Mm-hmm. So in your efforts, tell me a little bit about how you have tried to pull together your coalition, who you got as allies. I know that's really hard in Virginia too, because I live here and I've lived here for a long time, and I also work with Virginians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. Right. And we are also looking for advocates, especially on both sides of the aisle, to stand with us.
Mm-hmm. Well, when we formed IAHR, I knew very little, almost nothing really, about how Virginia was using solitary confinement. And I attended a meeting with the Department of Corrections that John Horish, your previous guest, had organized along with a couple of other advocates. And the Department of Corrections gave a presentation about its step-down program, which is a program they instituted in 2012 to enable men at Red Onion and Wallens Ridge prisons in Southwest Virginia to gradually transition out of solitary confinement. And it sounded like a very successful program, but I wanted to learn more about it from the perspective of prisoners themselves and family members of prisoners. So eventually I was able to establish contact with 2 or 3 prisoners at Red Onion and Wallens Ridge. And they, by word of mouth, my correspondence expanded to more and more prisoners. And Kimberly's son, Kevin, was one of them. I think Kimberly actually contacted us and got involved in IHR around the same time that her son, Kevin, started writing to me. And so we've been learning through this correspondence and through our contact with family members of prisoners more and more about how it is actually being used and some of the problems that have been encountered with the step-down program. It's definitely not a panacea. And there are a number of problems. It's become clear to us, for example, that one of our great concerns is that people with serious mental illness are being kept in long-term isolation. This really should never happen.
Right.
It's recognized by all mental health professionals as something that should never happen. It just makes mental illness worse, and it causes mental illness often in people who weren't mentally ill before. And we've learned that there are problems with people being starting this step-down program and being sent back to the beginning of it for relatively minor offenses in some cases. I've come to know men who have gone through the step-down program 3 and 4 times, and I think Kevin was one of those.
Right. And as a parent, having a son incarcerated, he's wrongfully incarcerated, so I was fighting his criminal case. When he was placed in solitary confinement, they gave us a timeline and basically said he went in 2016, but he actually went in 2013. And then the end date was 2020. And all this time was supposed to be in solitary confinement, or in this case, segregation. They have the many names. And the other part about it is when they're back there, their commissary is $5. $5 a week. Can you imagine what you can buy from a commissary? So Kevin lost a lot of weight. But one thing I want to say about Interfaith Action for Human Rights, they are dedicated to coordinating with these inmates to put their name on the table before those who are making decisions. Gay is being humbled here. She has done a fabulous job. How many inmates do you have in your database?
Oh, well, to varying degrees, I've corresponded with probably 50 to 60 inmates over the last 2.5 years.
And so what my son, he contacted me. He said, I wrote this woman named Gay Gardner. You got to get in touch with her, and she can help me. She can help me. And when I spoke to Gay, I told Gay, wait a minute. Gay said, I'll do this, I'll do that. I said, wait a minute. I can't be a mother that call you and let you do all the work for my son.
Good for you.
I'm willing to roll up my sleeve and be a part of the process. And Gay brought me to the Interfaith Action for Human Rights, and I joined the board, and I've been working with them now over a year.
That's fantastic. That was how it's done. You know, people have to step up and roll their sleeves up. You're so right. But it sounds like you spearheaded something that's had some, you can see where it's made a difference. Are you getting, so you had a meeting with the Department of Corrections. Who else out there is a possible ally for your work?
Well, we've formed a coalition with other partners, and SALT is one of our very valued partners, along with the ACLU of Virginia, the Virginia Council of Churches, Virginia Cure, which you may be familiar with, is an organization of family members of incarcerated people. Recently we've reached out to the National Alliance on Mental Illness in Virginia. And we are looking forward to collaborating with them, possibly on some legislation that may ban the use of solitary confinement for people with mental illness, which is one of our goals.
Well, and a very logical one. I mean, NAMI is a tremendous organization nationally, and Virginia NAMI is, and even in Northern Virginia. I mean, these are very dedicated people, and I just think that, again, we marginalize people in prisons because we don't see them. Right? So it's hard for people to focus energy when it's a population of people that are somewhere else that are not, it's not like hungry children or homeless people where you encounter them every day. I think it's very difficult to get people to focus on this issue for this population of people that are generally invisible to us.
With no voice.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
And so I think too, there's a wonderful book that was recently published called Ghost of the Innocent Man, and it's about somebody who was incarcerated, who was innocent for 25 years in North Carolina. But reading the book, and the entire book was from transcripts and his medical records and interviews, but you go through 25 years of arbitrary things that happened to this man. It's a remarkable book. I read this and I was outraged, like, how can they do this? How could this have happened to this man? And you read the books and you look at, and it gave me a much better feel for what goes on behind the walls of a prison that we never see and never hear about.
That's so true. And I think, you know, the Department of Corrections is not accustomed to getting a lot of scrutiny, frankly, from citizens on the outside. You know, one of the things that's been striking to me in this work is that how hard it often is for family members of incarcerated people to just find out what the heck is going on with their loved one. And, you know, Kimberly is a very, very strong advocate. If you know, if any of us, I think, were a young person in prison, we couldn't ask for a better mother to be on our side, really, than Kimberly. And you know, as she referred to a moment ago, I mean, it was very difficult for you, wasn't it, to just find out what was going on with Kevin and why they were saying that he was going to be in isolation for, you know, 4 more years as of a year ago.
It was very hard for them to respond. What I learned is, Catherine, they will not police themselves. VDOT will not police themselves. And so with the coalition now, they have to answer us, because we're not going away. We're not going away. Platforms like your show and the internet, and we're just going to keep pushing. And I will say this, there are some politicians, they always say it's not political. It's always political. And there are some politicians on both sides of the aisle who wants to push this agenda.
Well, and I know you are right about that. And when we come back from our break, we're going to talk more with Kimberly and with Gay about what is going on in our prison systems and why we all need to be concerned about what solitary confinement is doing to the chances of people returning to our communities after their incarceration. So join us after the break.
Guess what? I have some news for you. There's free food right there, junk food. Do you see that truck? Oh, jeez. It's a 2 Michelin star chef. All for free, ladies and gentlemen. All for free.
Here we have a panzanella with summer vegetables and pesto. Enjoy. How we doing?
So what do you got going on underneath that plate there?
This food is really about to be thrown away.
Yeah.
Is there something wrong with this food? Where did you get it from?
From farmers markets. They put aside the ugly vegetables and the ugly fruits.
Carrot Top, soft avocados. It was all food that was going to be discarded.
Even the drink you had is made from like a little bruised peach. Did it taste a little bruised?
Great. It's good.
The average person throws away 24 pounds of food a month.
That's a lot.
Isn't that a lot? Go visit SaveTheFood.com for more information. Thank you. Junk food time!
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. We are talking with two wonderful women here today. We are talking with Kimberly Jenkins Snodgrass and Gay Gardner from the Interfaith Action for Human Rights. And we are talking about what happens inside prisons and how solitary confinement particularly is being misused, and what that means for the people who are in prison who don't have advocates like the two of you.
There, following up on the point you just made, you know, we recognize that there are, you know, rare cases where isolation is probably the only appropriate response to, you know, where there's a need to remove temporarily somebody from the general prison population. But we've encountered so many examples in Virginia where it simply is not being used as a last resort. And one example I'll give you is last spring we became aware of a case of 6 men who were in a prison called Nottoway. It's a medium security prison. They were in the habit of meeting regularly for Bible study. And on one occasion, they were meeting to write thank you letters to a ministry that had given them workbooks to accompany their Bible study. And this was around the time when Virginia was instituting some new restrictions on mail coming into the prisons, ostensibly because of drugs that were coming into the prisons. And it generated a lot of concern among prisoners and their families, making it harder for them to receive mail. And so there was apparently a misunderstanding on this occasion where a guard thought that these men were talking about how they could use the grievance procedure to protest the new mail restrictions. And so they were immediately removed from Nottoway and sent to Red Onion Prison, a maximum security prison in Southwest Virginia, far, far away from their families, and they were put in solitary confinement. And, you know, of course, they weren't told how long they would be in solitary. This is another problem. The prisoners don't often know how long they're going to be there, which compounds the stress from being in isolation. And when we found out about it, we sent an email to several corrections officials, and then we found out that the men were released from solitary the following day. But most of them are still at Red Onion, and their security level was increased as a result of this, and they were, basically extra time was added onto their sentences. And so, you know, this is, even if they had been discussing, you know, the mail restrictions, they had every right to do that. So, you know, one wonders how many other cases are like this, where people are thrown into isolation. In this case, it happened to be 62 days, even though Virginia has a 30-day limit on disciplinary segregation. So, you know, we're very concerned that it clearly is not just being used as a last resort.
And if somebody's in solitary, they can't really, they're in solitary, right? They can't make a call, they can't send a letter, they cannot actually reach out to anyone for help.
Well, actually what happens when they're in solitary, they do get some privileges. They can make a call. They can make a call, but that call has to already be on a calling list. And then as far as mail, they can write a letter, and that's what they do. But usually there's some retaliation when that mail is sent. The letter allegedly is not read. But when I respond to that letter, the letter is read. And usually the inmates get some retaliation in that case.
It's also arbitrary. That's, you know, I just, and I get this from, like I said, the women who are formerly incarcerated in the Friends of Guest House program talk about this all the time. Mm-hmm. It is up to the guard. They decide when, they decide how, they decide if. And it all becomes this game of politics and manipulation and trying to figure out, you know, how to ally yourself strategically in this prison system. You know, these women were also talking about it. It's almost as if they are forcing us to be manipulative because we can't simply say we need something and have it brought to us, or we're forced to have to figure out a way around the system. That's crazy.
One of the things Gabe mentioned earlier, the step down program. One of the things I did is I went to the Operation Procedure Manual. I've read everything that governs the step down program. On paper, it's an excellent program. So what I found out, because my son, and he has some college education, so what I found out is the reason the cycle does not end for these inmates is simply because of the way it's being implemented by the guards.
There you go.
Implementation is the key to everything. And so one of the things that I was trying to talk with the Department of Corrections about is just more training and to, you know, to have more sensitivity, because when you're up at Red Onion, the truth of the matter is you have Caucasians with about 90% population of African Americans and other people of color. Well, in some cases, these guys have never had that. And then they usually have high school education. So can you imagine giving a gun, a blackjack, over African American males that's shackled?
I know, but people don't believe it. And so this is what, so as far as next steps, what is your best course of action with the organization, the advocates that you have, the meetings that you've managed to put together? Is anyone patroning legislation for you in 2018?
Well, we're just kind of at the beginning of that process, assessing the legislative landscape, particularly after the recent elections, which you know, surprised a lot of us.
Changed the face of our House of Delegates for sure.
Yeah,
it did.
Because before this, our main focus was, you know, pressing for administrative reform.
Right.
You know, the conventional wisdom seemed to be that given the composition of the legislature, it wouldn't be productive to try to get legislation on solitary confinement enacted. But you know, this is changing, and we're working with one legislator in particular who has expressed an interest in introducing a bill on this. You know, I'm not sure, to be honest, whether we're going to be in shape to do that for the upcoming session, which is starting in January, as you know. It's coming up very fast. So we're sort of in flux, but we definitely want to pursue legislation either in the upcoming session or the one after that. And we're working with a legislator on hammering out the text of the bill. You know, there's always a dilemma between asking for more than you think that you can get,
and negotiating around that.
But not asking for so much that your bill is just going to die an immediate death.
Right.
You know, so. You know, John is a very experienced citizen lobbyist, and he's giving us some good advice on that, as well as our other coalition partners, and we'll be meeting in a couple of days, actually, with them to talk through this. But I think that we're going to be pressing both for legislative reform and for administrative action, and we'll be reaching out to the incoming Northam administration as well.
I think that's a good course of action too, because I think you do have to have policies, because that doesn't change the culture inside those prisons. Training changes the culture, accountability and reporting and other kinds of things changes the behavior, but you have to have policies or there's no incentive for anyone to start changing the culture. And so I really see that this is a first step, is finding the legislators who are going to be your allies.
In fairness to Virginia Department of Corrections, one of the things I want to say, I recently visited my son because he's been freed from solitary confinement. I have seen some changes there. I've seen some changes with the personnel. I've seen some changes, basically how they move in the inmates. So I wanted to be fair to them and say, and it may be because of our coalition.
It may be, right?
Right. I have seen some changes.
I think that's great, and I think that the credit should be given where it's due,
right.
And you should reward them with praise if
right.
you have seen that efforts are being made. I mean, perhaps just, again, it's a lack of training or understanding what's appropriate or what's in the best interest of the prisoner. Again, we are so focused on the punitive nature of incarceration instead of the pay your dues and rehabilitate and get these people entered back into our communities. They need housing, they need jobs, and they have to believe that they have paid their due and are now a wholly full citizen of Virginia.
Right.
And I don't see that the overuse of solitary confinement is helping one bit.
Right, it really thwarts rehabilitation. You know, and the thing is that, you know, some of these men are serving life sentences, but most of them, as I think John Horace pointed out, the vast majority of them will be released from prison at some point. And so, you know, this is why we all have a stake in changing this, because, you know, as John said, I think, you know, today's prisoner may be tomorrow's neighbor, and
that's right.
You know, you don't want people who have been whose mental health has been profoundly undermined by being in isolation in prison. You don't want them living next door to you or in
right.
your community, and you know, it makes it all the more difficult for them to become responsible citizens again. As you say, there are so many things that are stacked against them as it is, without having had this experience of basically being tortured in prison, which was not part of their sentence.
No, right?
Right, exactly.
Not being tortured in prison. So I am very optimistic going forward that you're going to be able to make great inroads. I think really just raising the visibility of the issue and talking about it is the very first step. You have a website. We'll put that website address up so that people know how to go online and sign up for your emails and your actions and the upcoming events. And I think there's also other groups on the show. Several months ago, I had Lewinsville Faith in Action Coalition, and they have specific interest groups. And so there's probably a lot of groups that really don't know that there's someone out here working on this. Right. So yes. I'll make it my mission to make sure that they can come see you guys, right?
Wonderful.
Exactly.
That's what we want, because we need people who are concerned individuals, whether you're part of another organization or not. If you're just, you know, learning about this for the first time and you're concerned, please come to us. We can definitely use your energy and support and
volunteer.
And people have relationships, yes. And that's the other thing, is some of these organizations have been working on a lot of other issues where they know legislators, and so those relationships also make a huge difference. So I want to thank both of you for being here. This has been fascinating. I have learned a lot. This was really not on my radar. And so I hope, as everyone thinks about this holiday season and what you can do to make the world a better place, that you will go and do good in this world, because there's lots of opportunities. Thanks so much for joining us.